I would like to thank the Indian Montessori Foundation for inviting me to share a few ideas and discuss this importance of education beyond worksheets and this importance of developing a love for learning that enables us to be lifelong learners. Now, when I was given the topic, I was, very excited at the direction and the possibilities that this topic presented itself. But as time came closer, if I'm being absolutely honest, I was quite overwhelmed by that same possibility. What makes us lifelong learners? To be honest, I'm not sure if I have the answer to that question. But what I would like to discuss today with you are some of the things that I think are essential in our journey towards becoming lifelong learners. Now, before I begin, I do want to share a discovery that I made while I was preparing for this talk. I finally found the answer to staying young. Yeah, you must be thinking it's healthy food, it's exercise, it's meditation, but strangely, it's not. And for those of you who know me, will understand why I was quite relieved at hearing that. I found the answer from a person I least expected to. But the answer came from Henry Ford. So here's the big reveal of the talk. Yeah. If anything, I hope you go with the secret of staying forever young. Henry Ford said, anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. Now, please don't stop all your exercises and healthy eating habits. But what he does say has a deep and philosophical meaning. What does young imply to each one of us from the statement that we just heard can be interpreted by each one of us in so many different ways. How do we keep learning? How do we get ourselves to be lifelong learners? How do we keep ourselves young? Many of these answers lie in our own experiences of learning. They lie in the memories we have of learning. What our learning was like when we were young. What our learning was like in school or at home. How we were held from the beginning when we, as a child, were so curious and could not get enough of this amazing world that we found ourselves in. How we were held in our learning in so many ways influences our approach to learning as adults. And it also often indicates the way we as adults then continue to hold the next generation of children in their learning. What is the point of all this learning? What's the purpose of learning? What is learning to do for us? Learning must liberate us, not suppress or suffocate us. Learning must build in us an acceptance, a tolerance, not prejudice, not hate. Learning must build in us empathy and understanding and not apathy. Learning must motivate us to do our best and strive for perfection, not lead us to competition and wishing the worst of the other. Learning must not make us afraid of making mistakes, but instead accept mistakes as a pathway to progress. Learning must lead to peaceful coexistence in spite of our differences and not to wars and conflict. What we learn, how we learn, from whom we learn, under what conditions we learn, seems to have a direct impact on us as individuals. And this in turn seems to have a direct impact on humanity. If this is the implication of learning and the education we receive, then it is imperative that education must go beyond worksheets. Now, I'm not against worksheets. I'm in no way saying or advocating they are all absolutely bad. That's not what I'm saying here. But what I think is the need of the hour is for us to look at education from the lens of peace and the child as the agent of that peace. We need to start looking at how education or our learning can lead to humanities coexisting together in this beautiful world that we find ourselves in. Education must go beyond worksheets in order for us to be able to work collectively and with a deep gratitude for the world around us. Our learning must enable each one of us to coexist in this very intricate web of independence and interdependence that keeps the world evolving and on the path of progress. Education and our love for learning must therefore begin from our formative years, right from birth, at a time when the child is creating himself, creating his personality. A personality that will be the foundation for the rest of his life. So, how can we do that? Let's look at some ways where learning can lead to what we just discussed. And what should be the components of learning if we're going to be lifelong learners? And if our children are going to be lifelong learners? Now, we can all agree that life experiences play a very important role in our learning. They play a very important role in our willingness to be lifelong learners. They play a significant role in the way we perceive the world, in the way we understand the world that we live in. Our experiences leave us either wanting to learn more, driven to learn, hunger for learning, or sometimes quite the opposite, not wanting to learn. We as individuals and the world that we are part of seems to be quite closely connected to what we learn and what we learn from our life experiences. So, rich life experiences are vital for children in order for them to be lifelong learners. Offering children rich life experiences is actually one of the easiest things to do, as they are already in awe with the world around them. And they are so naturally interested and so naturally curious to know the world around them. They say curiosity is the wick in the candle of learning. And we see children exhibit curiosity all the time. Children touch, children feel, they smell things, they constantly want to know, they ask what, they ask why, and in a variety of ways express their curiosity and begin to learn about the world. Every experience triggers a range of sensations for them and a range of emotions. And the more the experiences the children have, the more they begin to learn and predict for themselves. This in turn helps them begin to know how to function in the world that they are part of. And this is an essential part of their learning process. Now let's just look at one little experience. And I could talk about so many experiences that we could offer our children. But just let's look at one little experience that we know children have or we could offer to the children. Let's look at an experience of being around plants, whether you have them at home or you have them at school. Being in the midst of plants will help children learn about nature. It will help children understand laws of nature. It will help children realize the discipline in nature. and it would help them build an appreciation for the beauty that's there in nature. Watching flowers bloom, watering plants, whether it's repotting a plant that's now seems to have overgrown a space in a small little pot and finding the right size to put that plant into, watching the leaves close in the evening and at night and then begin to open the very next day, watching flowers bloom at a certain moment in the day and then closing, touching the leaves, tasting them, watching plants climb, watching plants creep, looking at vegetables that are underground, offers so much learning. It creates the possibility of learning to become knowledge for the children. Problem solving, cause and effect, calculations, judgments, decision making, even things we wouldn't consider, but volume, geometry, zoology, botany. All of this children learn naturally. They learn just by being in the midst of nature. And they learn this without even realizing this. If their learning is like this from the beginning in nature, then how can these same subjects or disciplines not excite them in the future, when their first relationship to such learning has been with so much joy and love? It is this love, this joy, that will stay with children forever, making them lifelong learners. Learning then won't just become something that must be done for the sake of doing it, but it will become something that children feel an intense desire to quite naturally do because it becomes essential for their life. It is this joy that in turn leads to new sparks that is so essential for lifelong learning. It sparks new interests. No amount of worksheets, however well you may argue that they are made, can match this kind of learning in the reality of life itself. These very children who've had these experiences, as adults, will not need to be reminded or told to look after their environments. It will just incarnate within them and just be their way of life. If we are to offer this kind of learning to the children, then it becomes important for us as adults to find that same joy in the world that is around us and offer it to our children with that same love and enthusiasm that children seem to have for the world around them. We must, and this is necessary, we must let go of our expectations, of our preconceived expectations of what our children must learn. We can't dictate what will be learned. It's beyond our capacity. We really can't be naive and think it is us who's making the child learn. What really happens in the depths of the child's mind, in the depths of his soul, is something sacred and hidden. If we are able to free ourselves from such expectations of what the children must learn, then we will find ourselves feeling free, feeling liberated, quite actually enjoying the experiences with our children. And this in turn will leave our children with a fond memory of the experience being one that was filled with a joy. This impression of the experience is what will leave them open and willing to new experiences. And instead of a fear to learn, it will be quite the opposite. They will build a desire to learn, which is what is necessary if we are to be lifelong learners. We need to be interested to learn, and we must have a desire to learn. So we see that our learning and to be lifelong learners seems to be quite closely tied up with interest. And interest has quite an important role to play in the kinds of things we find ourselves quite eager to learn. So here again, we find a very simple answer to this question. To be a lifelong learner, all we need is to have interest. If we want to cultivate a love for learning in our children, then we need to find what interests them. We need to follow their interest. We need to notice what children are doing. We need to notice what they're saying. We need to observe their interactions with people and their environment. We need to pay attention. When you read a lot of Montessori texts, she often says this one thing in her text. She says, an insect will move to a flower in the garden among so many flowers. It will still move to one particular flower. And I think this is so true of children. Children will also move towards aspects that interest them. They will move towards aspects that they find an energy from within moving them towards. And they will seek out their learning, their own learning. Often we get so caught up in what we want the children to learn that we sometimes fail to see what it is that they want to learn. What is it that excites them? What seems to draw their attention? Each child will be different. Children in the same home will be different. Children in the classroom will be different. Each of them will be different, and each will have a different interest. And very often, I think this idea of finding each one's interest and supporting it is quite daunting. It is quite overwhelming. But the beauty of being with children is that if we really listen, if we really observe, the children will give us the answers. In fact, the answer will be right in front of us if we're willing to listen and see it. A child interested in automobiles or in animals or that same counting will show you signs of his interest. Even if he doesn't tell you that, you will see signs of those interests. What will those signs look like? There'll be many different signs. A child who's quite interested in automobiles may talk a lot about vehicles that he saw. The child interested in automobiles may ask you names of vehicles. He may ask you names of the vehicles that the family members seem to be driving or riding. He may be eager to learn the logos of vehicles or may even begin to identify logos on various vehicles that pass by. They may talk about their favorite car, the favorite color of their car. When they play with their toys, you may see them gravitating to automobiles more than other things. They may draw vehicles in their artistic expressions. If we are able to notice these signs, and if we're able to fuel that interest, then their learning will be enriched. Their learning will stimulate their mind, it will stimulate their body. It will move them towards more of such learning, as it will give them a very deep satisfaction. This in turn will give them the scope to take on new interest, to further their interest, to take on new learning. And they will do this for themselves. And that cycle will continue. Now, I had the good fortune of spending a lot of time during the lockdown, when the initial lockdown began. I have the good fortune of spending a lot of time with my nephew. And my nephew at that time was just about 4. He's about 6 today. And we have a little outdoor space. And my nephew and I, we would sit out often, and we would look at the sky and have some delightful conversations. I mean, if those of you who've had conversations with 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, it's absolutely delightful. Things that they have to say about life. His interests in the sky and the stars seemed to quite coincidentally at that time get fueled through a book that I had that we would read a lot. It was a lovely book. It was a National Geographic book. And he loved the book, and he still does today. And the book had a lot about the Earth and the planets, and the book had things that he could understand. And it had some things that probably he would not be able to understand. So we just talked about them, and we had conversations about them. He had some favorite pages. And children, when they love a book, they want to go back to a certain page, they want to go back to a certain story over and over. And he had some favorite pages he liked to look at often. And this led to his discovery of what is an index and how could he find a page that he wanted. He would ask sometimes, what does that mean? And this led to his discovery of what is a glossary and how he could find the meanings of words. He was very interested in what astronauts wore, and this led to his own discovery of spacesuits and fabrics. He looked at ideas of recycling, waste management. This interest that he seemed to show us was supported by all the adults around him. And this enabled him to express his thoughts and not be afraid to ask. It was evident that he was driving his own learning. He asked, we listened, he showed, we saw, we simply followed his interest with no expectations. He has learned so much more than just what was in that book. His learning, his own knowledge, his love and interest for the sky, the moon, the earth has now grown over the years. His interest has led him to new discoveries and new interests. He says today very confidently at 6 that he wants to be an astronaut. I don't know if he will or if he won't. I don't know. But what I do know is that these memories will stay with him, and they will act as a catalyst in his journey of lifelong learning. Quite funnily, in school, he was given a worksheet to name the planets. He was so disappointed, and I think probably a little insulted, that all he was expected to know were the names of the planets, when he knew so much more. Worksheets don't give us the whole picture of the children's learning. They don't tell us what children actually know. They just tell us what we want them to know, or what we think they should know, and how much we expect them to know. It is limiting through our own prejudice and limitations that don't fully give the children the opportunity to express the wealth of learning they have done for themselves, or even apply that wealth of learning for themselves. Worksheets are marked, they're scored, and all of the children's learning is reduced to some numbers and grades. If learning is reduced to numbers and reduced to grades, and to what is reflected on a worksheet, then we will end up with children, though in school, though sitting in a classroom, though receiving an education, but not learning. They will instead just conform to the learning expectations of others. To be lifelong learners, it's important not to be afraid to make a mistake. We are fallible, and that is a part of living life. To be a lifelong learner, we need to be able to embrace failure. Fear of being wrong stops us from being lifelong learners. But the faith in ourselves to be able to overcome a challenge or to fix a problem along the way, should one arise, gives us the strength to keep learning. Courage is an important idea in learning. What we need to help our children build for themselves in order to be lifelong learners is the courage to do things, try things, not be afraid of an error or a failure. We can't make the children courageous. We can't impose courage on them. This is built through their own life experiences and from their own memories of their life experiences. It is built through their confidence, their self-esteem, and their dignity. Error is a part of life. Mistakes are part of the learning process. It's not the fear of error that we need to build in our children. It's the courage to face the error and grow from it that we need to build in our children if they are to be lifelong learners. Children are fearless learners. And if you've been with children, you know they're fearless learners. They readily even accept an error made. Children display courage in so many ways. How do we see it? Where do we see it? Sometimes it's in things that we don't even consider as courage. A child trying something new to eat for the first time, there's a sign of courage. And believe me, being a fussy eater myself, I think it takes a lot of courage to try something new to eat. Riding a bicycle without training wheels takes courage. Asking a child they have never met before at a playground if he would like to play with him, that takes courage. Going off to summer camp, we sign them up so quickly to summer camp and they go. This takes courage. Consoling a weeping child in class takes courage. Repeating something over and over to perfect it takes courage. These are signs that our children show us every day, if we are willing to notice and observe them. To be a lifelong learner, it's important to acknowledge that there is no one right answer. Or for that matter, we do not have all the answers. It's the seeking of the answers, the seeking of the truth, and the humility to acknowledge that we don't have the answer is what makes us lifelong learners. We can't learn for our children. They have to do this on their own. Learning will need children to be involved, need them to participate. It will need them to do things for themselves. The action from the child is necessary for his learning. It's the actual participation that brings about that learning for the child. It is from this involvement that children begin to learn to make decisions for themselves. They begin to reflect, they begin to correct themselves. And it is from this freedom to repeat and from the opportunity to fix their own errors that children will learn for themselves. What we may consider quite simple or quite easy is not going to be the same for our children. Learning takes time. Learning takes effort. It means some errors along the way until an understanding organically emerges. Self-discipline, prediction, building of the intelligence, all of this will spontaneously emerge for the children as a consequence of their own learning. And these very qualities, in turn, will lead children to further spontaneous choices and will move them further in their own learning. Worksheets, on the other hand, give the children the impression that there is only one right answer. It cultivates the mind to think of everything as right or wrong, or having only one answer. Instead of building courage, it discourages. All of us, or at least many of us, have memories of bold red marks all over our worksheets that we received, indicating our failure, simply because we did not know what was on that sheet. Many of us, through these memories, have told ourselves, or I think rather convinced ourselves, that we are not good or we are incapable. We find ourselves saying, I am incapable of math. I can't do science. Art is beyond me. A score on a worksheet has led us to make decisions for our future and of what we are capable of. And some of us have lived our whole life believing that. This has robbed us of many rich life experiences that we could have had. I recently read a quote from Haruki Murakami, who said, if you only read the books that everyone else is reading, you can only think what everyone else is thinking. I think this is so true of worksheets. If children are all doing the same worksheets, then they are all thinking only the same things. How can this then prepare our children for life? We don't know what the future is going to be. We don't know what life will be like years from now. In fact, why go to years? We don't even know what life will be like even a year from now. None of us ever imagined that our life would be what it is today a few years back. Yet we have all survived and we have found creative and useful ways to live the life in the times we find ourselves in. Look at us today. We are together, learning together on a platform that has been created for the very purpose of people to connect, regardless of distances. We have found food and medicine being delivered in the remotest places. Such is the power of the human mind. And such is the human capacity for creation. Education empowers us. And the capacity for lifelong learning allows us to adapt, allows us to create, allows us to survive, allows us to progress. If learning needs to lead us to be able to find solutions, make discoveries, invent new things, and allow for civilization to prosper, then it's imperative that our children, who are the future of tomorrow, realize their own unique potentials. It's important that they stand out as individuals in their own right, with their own strengths and capacities, and cultivate a fearless love for learning. Our children are the future. Our children today are making the men of tomorrow. Our children will change and affect the world in the future. All we can hope is that education gives them the strength, gives them the means, and gives them the moral conscience to change the world for the better. It is only education as an aid for life. It is only education that we strive for all our life as lifelong learners. It is only education which will equip our children to create a world of peace and harmony. Thank you.